Hey everybody, my name is Casey Haynes. I'm a program specialist with Northern Border Regional Commission. Glad to see you all here, and excited to look at the pre-applications together. So just so I have a sense for the best use of our time this morning, kind of been asking this at the start of all of these. Can you just drop in the chat if you have been unable to find either the link to log in, get your account set up in the system, or find that step-by-step guidance for submitting the pre-application. So I will be operating off the assumption everyone has been able to find those, but if not, let us know and we'll hook you up in the chat. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to do a very high level quick run through of how to kind of navigate in the system, find that pre-application, go over some really common things that folks have been encountering, and then we'll do a little bit of a Q&A session toward the end. So feel free if you have a question that is, burning or relevant to something I'm looking at, feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. We've got other folks from our program team here able to assist with those questions. So I will dive right in. Great. So what I'm looking at is sort of a test environment. So if things look a little bit different, don't worry about that. Mostly so all of the navigation will kind of look the same. So I'm logged in as my sort of test dummy account. I've got a few of my own applications in the system ready to poke at. So this is my homepage that I'm looking at as I'm going in. So to get us started here, we're going to go over to the Opportunities tab. And it'll show us a list of the available opportunities to us. Oh, this is great. There's a brand new one in our test environment for me to look at. So I can show you right from the beginning the whole process. So this is what's available for me here. I can look at that by clicking the eye icon. Again, a lot of this is going to look different, or just don't pay too much attention to the information that's entered in there. All of that will look different, but structurally it'll all look the same. So you'll have the information here about the opportunity you're looking at, be able to review that. Once we've gotten that, we've got these other tabs about the financials, some performance information. So basic details there. I say, that's great. I definitely want to apply for this. So I'm going to click on this qualify button. And that qualify button isn't necessarily kind of a personal evaluation of am I qualified for this. It's more of a add to cart option is the way that I like to think about it. You're really saying like, okay, of these list of opportunities, I want to set this aside so that I can apply for it later. So once you've qualified it, it'll show up in your qualified list of opportunities on the left-hand sidebar here. It'll also take you directly to that page, but if you ever do need to find it, it'll pop up back there. So we'll create our pre-application. It's going to ask me for a name for this pre-application. We don't have specific naming conventions for it, so use your best judgment on that. I'm going to just put my initials here and call it a day.
Casey, I would just encourage people to use something specific about their project in the project name. Don't keep it generic like 2024 Spring Catalyst application, because that doesn't give us enough information to understand who you are or what you're doing.
That's great. Yeah, it is nice for us to have some shorthand as far as what your project is and about. So thank you. Um, so great. So we are in our pre-application now. We're looking make that information is correct. So a quick note, if you have if you registered your organization and you did not include your UEI number, it's an optional field when you're signing your organization up. There is not a way right now to edit that. If you, for instance, were waiting on a sam.gov confirmation to get that number, that will be editable um, from your organization profile tab. During the full application phase, you'll be able to do a verification process. We'll go over that later. Basically, don't worry about your UEI right now. This is a great opportunity for me to touch base on another question we're getting a lot about, which is once you've started a pre-application, if you navigate somewhere else or need to come back to it, where does it live? Because it's not super clear. We were just in that opportunities tab. But what we want to do is actually go to applications. Once you're in that tab, the information on the sidebar will change. So it'll show you these options. You want to make sure that pre-applications is chosen. And then lastly, the default for folks seems to be pre-application submitted. So if you're only looking at the ones that you've submitted and you haven't submitted any, nothing will show up here. So make sure that that all is selected. As you can see, I've been playing around a lot in here. And this is the one that I just started. So I didn't even enter any information. As soon as I clicked that button to create it, it became a record that I can then go back, make changes to, save, all of that sort of stuff. So I'm going to go back in and edit that. Great. So we are going through our pre-application. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the specific fields themselves, especially as it relates to more program-specific information. So these things that are saying, see program user manual for additional instructions. We do have the program managers on the call, though. So if there are questions that feel appropriate to touch on, we can definitely get those answered. Sarah.
Hey, Casey, there's a question in the chat, and I figured while you're right where you are, we might ask it. Are you able, when you see your full list of pre-applications and you select the one you want to work on, are you able to edit the pre-application name?
Let's see. My guess, let me see. Let me go back to my list here. Applications. Got the title there. Edit. So yeah, it looks like we can, yeah, so I don't think that we can edit that. Oh wait, there we go, right there.
In the pre-application overview screen. Okay. There you go, Francie. That's your answer.
Question. Awesome. All right. So then, unless you are jointly applying, anything that says co-applicant, unless you are sure that you have a co-applicant that you're applying with, make sure to leave all of that, no or blank. If you're adding secondary users to your organization account to help submit the pre-application and everything, there's an option in there that says co-applicant organization type. That'll throw things off. So unless you know for sure, I would just make sure all of that is no or none. Put in some info here. Again, just scrolling through these, but stop if there's a question that I need to touch on. Yes. Some info. that out. Great. So I made it look real easy, but that is the bulk of the information that you're going to be submitting as part of this pre-application from kind of a narrative standpoint. We've got some budget stuff that's going to come in a sec. So on this contacts section here, I've only got my one contact so far. I can either create a new one or associate an existing one. This is going to pull up a window of all of the accounts, all of the users that you have available in your account up near the top here. A note that you're limited to 3 users for your account. So mine looks a little bit different in that respect. And then you'll get a long list of other names down here. And these are the LDD, Local Development District Technical Assistance Providers. So while they are not necessarily, if you have an LDD that you know you're working with, and you've got a contact that you want to associate with that pre-application record, you can do that from this screen. It's not mandatory. You will also be able to update that later in the full application, edit that later. So if you have that, great. If not, no worries. I'm going to leave mine blank for now. I'm going to click that acknowledgement, hit save. And so while you're working in this system, with pretty much the way that it's built, pretty much any time you're on one of these pages and you're working your way through the information, you'll start on the overview tab, work your way down. Then you'll come over to the next tab, start at the top, work your way down. So more information about the opportunity, sort of a summary from the opportunity itself. And then this is populated, this information will show up based on what you put into this budget table. So you click that little plus sign to open it up. And then these are the high level budget categories that you're going to fill out here. So just a quick note, there's no additional budget documents that you need to upload specifically. All of the budget information is contained, that we're asking for right now is contained within this budget table and then this narrative section here. So I'm going to fill out some information. 10,000, 5,000, and let's say someone gave me 770 just for kicks. So you'll fill all that information out. Hit save. Great. So my budget table is saved and updated there. Just a quick note on okay, well, so let me just backtrack for a moment because one thing I'm noticing about this particular opportunity is that it's missing one of the tabs that you will see in your pre-application. There's a locations tab in here. And let me pull that up real quick so that you can see what that looks like. Okay, there we go. So yes, so when you're working in the pre-application, you will see that locations tab. It's a list that you can highlight, move it over, remove things, the different counties associated there. Probably most projects will be within a single county, so you want to think about it not necessarily as like, the counties that might be served by your project, but more kind of physical location of the project. If you're doing sort of a renovation, what is the county that it's happening in? If you have any other questions about that, feel free to drop it into the chat or raise your hand. If you pick multiple counties, it's going to calculate the match percentage based on the counties that you select. Say, save this here. Okay, well, my match rate didn't change, but it'll start off blank. And then once you put your counties in, you hit save, and then your match percentage will show up there. So wanted to make sure we touched on that. I'm gonna come back here because this budget table, it basically looks at that match percentage that was generated, and then it runs some validations to make sure that you're not, making sure that you're listing your matching funds at the rate that you're required to. Sarah.
Okay, Casey, we've got a couple of questions that I think are this is a good time. So CJ King asked, is the budget narrative the only place where match source status should be input? And hopefully Casey's explanation just showed you that the columns, well, let's see the budget. Yep. This NBRC shares what you're asking from NBRC, other federal share documents, your federal funders, and other represents all other match sources, so non-federal match sources. So that is where you put that information. So no, the budget narrative is not the only place. The budget table is also where you're putting in your match. The source, if your question was specifically about the source, yes, that budget narrative is where you can describe the source of each of those amounts.
Oh, so there's a second tab, there's a second table in the funding sources that we're doing beyond the narrative. Beyond the budget narrative, there's also a funding sources section. Okay,
That's correct.
Thank you.
And then before I move on to the next one, are there any other questions about budget table or that budget section? You do not need to upload the budget narrative. There's a box, Casey, if you scroll down just a little bit. Budget narrative, this is where you just enter your budget narrative information. So that's a change from our previous portal that we had. You had to upload information. We've tried to build everything into the GMS so that you just type it right in rather than uploading.
A quick note, because I'm seeing it. If a field looks like it should be editable but isn't, the budget narrative section wasn't for me. I just needed to click that edit button to do that here.
There's a question, is it a requirement to state your matched sources? If you know what they are, yes, please tell us what they are. Particularly if they're federal. That is an important consideration for your NBRC pre-application, is understanding what is the federal rate of participation.
I would just add to that if there is a portion of the expected project costs that you're not sure where the funding will come from, it's okay to list it as unknown. That's okay. That just helps us understand where the project is in terms of putting together the funding sources. You won't be penalized for that.
Okay, so Casey, there's one other question, not budget related, that I want to go to, and that is the locations tab. Yeah. So Amy says she is not seeing any data in our locations tab. And I have not heard that problem from anyone else before. So Amy, if you are still not seeing that, I think you should probably shoot an email to admin@NBRC because that's a unique one that I haven't heard of. Maybe Casey has.
I haven't heard that either. So yeah, if you shoot an email over to us, we'll do some troubleshooting with our technical assistance providers.
I had other questions as well whenever it's appropriate.
Go for it.
I don't know if this applies, but as I was looking at your references, and these are the references under sample pre-application and application templates. There are two budget narrative documents. One's called budget narrative with instructions, and one is budget narrative with instruction samples. And then there's samples of an SF 424 form, etc. Do those apply to this pre-application or to the actual grant application if we're invited?
They do not apply to the pre-application.
Okay, that's what I thought. I wasn't sure, but I just wanted to double check because they didn't seem to mirror up or look similar to what this template looks like. Okay, thank you.
So we basically took some of the information we we're trying to get out of those and built them right into the system in here. So those aren't required during this pre-application phase. During the full application, we will ask for a more detailed 424 CBW uploaded into the system, but that's not required at this time.
Okay, my other question really quickly is I'm accessing this application anytime I go into it from the recently viewed. And I haven't renamed anything. I was just clicking on that. In my recently viewed, there are two different applications, if you will. One that shows us as the applicant, as the subrecipient organization, and the other one that does not. I don't know why that's, if it's just like a ghost or something in the system or what. I've typically been just going to the one that shows us as the subrecipient.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and that's one of those typically what happens is it's not entirely clear that pathway to go back to your pre-application, right? Kind of going back in here, selecting all. So it's actually pretty easy to find your way back to the opportunity and like create a new pre-application. And so we've had a couple of folks have that happen where you've sort of accidentally created a second one because it looked like some information didn't save. And then if you've sort of essentially created two records, both of them would show up under recently viewed. So you theoretically, I think if I'm thinking about that correctly, if you go to all there, you should see maybe two records under pre-application. And that's okay. You can go into any duplicate ones that have been created. And there should be a withdraw option. Just save. Well, if I filled out enough of the information. Oh, there we go. Withdraw. So yeah, you can withdraw any duplicates that you might have ended up with.
So it may be good to rename the one that the major one that we're working on. Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't want to bother with figuring out the withdrawing piece, like renaming it so that you have a real clear sense for yourself which of those under the recently viewed is a record you want to look at. That's also another way of doing it.
Thank you.
Casey, I've got one more question I'm not sure the answer to. I think I know the answer to it, but I'm hoping you can confirm. Erica needs to make changes to the organizational profile. Does she need to send an email to NBRC and have our developer do it on the back end? Is that the right answer to that question?
I think that is the correct answer. Let me just look here. Almost certain, but I'm wondering if there's any specific pieces. Yeah, no, you can kind of associate new contacts and things like that. But as far as editing the information, you will need to send us an email.
Okay, so adding contacts. Casey, can you go over that? That's been a question. I know that's come up for a lot of people. So if you could go through that, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. So on the Home tab up at the top, that will show you your organization profile link. So click there. It was just there. You'll scroll down to the bottom to contacts. This is where if you haven't associated any others, it's just going to be the first person who registered the account as this primary user. You can click add new. You'll fill out the information. This is the field I was mentioning that just, leave it as none unless you know you've got a co-applicant working with you. Fill that information out. Once you've filled it out and clicked save on that pop-up, they'll show up as another line under here. And the last step is clicking this little send invitation icon. That'll send them an email to finalize their account. A quick note that I covered associating an LDD with your account a little bit ago. You want to make sure to not associate, don't put anyone you're working with in an LDD capacity in your contact section. We have kind of a whole separate process for that. One thing to note, so the system can only have one unique email address. And so think about this section really as if you've got another member on your team, a grant writer, something like that, who's going to come in and fill out some of those pre-application details. That is an awesome use for that. A quick note that secondary users can work on all the pre-applications. They can work in the system. They can do most things. It will be the primary user that has to click the submit button to finalize that sending it over to us. So before I get too much further ahead of myself, I see some raised hands. DJ?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask in the budget section a question. So the line, the LDD, I'm anticipating would go on the line that says consultants. Is that correct?
Let me tag in one of our program managers to confirm that for you.
And then I have a second part of that question.
Yeah, if Marina or Adrian is on and able to touch on that.
Sure. So, okay. Are you able to show the budget screen?
Absolutely.
Oh, thanks. Okay. So, Steve, was that CJ?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so exactly where are you
So I was anticipating putting it
trouble?
on the consultant line.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah. Yeah, so we recommend that you put it in the consultant line. Sometimes when you get into the detailed budget where you are able to show the line by line items, sometimes folks put it under contracts, but I think consultants is the best place.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask a second half of that then?
Yeah.
So if the way I have penciled this in, but not filled it in on my application yet, I put all of that amount under NBRC share with no match for that line item and showed our match on the construction line. Is that okay? Or does every line have to have a 50-50 match?
That's a great question. No, every line does not need to have a 50-50 match. So you may put NBRC funds towards whatever activities that you'd like to put those funds towards. And it does not have to have a match line by line. The total needs to show the match, the required match, but it does not need to be line by line.
Right, so we couldn't put the whole amount under construction and then we have to subtract the 20,000, well, whatever. We have to subtract the LDD portion in order to fill in the other lines. Now, I was only going to do 2 lines, construction and consultants. So the construction line needs to say 1 million minus 20,000, correct?
Because you're putting the LDD costs.
On the second line, yeah.
Yeah, you can put the consultant costs, the LDD costs under consultants or contracts, but yeah.
Okay, Thank you.
So it would show MBRC share 20,000 under consultants, and you don't have to have a match in that line. And then construction would be your other costs, and those could be MBRC or match costs.
Right. As long as the bottom of the NBRC column adds up to the right amount that we're allowed to
Correct.
ask for. Got it. Thank you.
Correct, yes.
Hey, Adrian, while we have you, we have
Yeah.
another question that is sort of budget and match related. It's from Tanya or Tanya. I apologize if I said your name wrong. ARPA funds are, this is Tanya's question. I'd like you to clarify if this is
Sure.
accurate. ARPA funds are ineligible for match due to federal, but if ARPA funds are passed to a state and now designated as MJRP funds, then they be used as match.
Okay, let's start with the first part. ARPA funds are a federal source of funding. They're not ineligible to be used as match for MBRC. But we do have to be aware of the 80% federal ceiling. So MBRC allows you to match with federal funds up to the 80% federal ceiling. So you would likely not be able to use those federal funds as a 20% match, but if you are in a transitional county and you have a 50% match requirement, you could use federal funds to match part of that requirement. If the ARPA funds are passed to a state and designated as state funds, essentially, can they be used as match? I'm gonna double check on that because there are some instances where there are federal sources that roll through to a state agency, such as like CDBG funding, that do not count as federal sources. Let me double check that because it's possible, but I do not know off the top of my head. If it is
Thanks.
considered a state source, it would be eligible as match. If it is not, again, it would fall under that same federal ceiling rule.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the MJRP acronym, I should have written it out. It's the Maine Jobs and Recovery Program. That money that came to the governor, and then she was able to designate as state funding where it was going to be directed. And that was part of what we were looking for as part of our funding blend for our match. And just wanted to clarify if that would be counted as federal in making up that blend. So thank you.
Yeah, let me see if I can get an answer to you quickly.
Great. Thank you so much.
And then one more question for Adrian while we have her. Okay, Adrian, this is not a budget related question. This is a question about a project that the community is about 7,000 residents. However,
Yeah.
the project is serving fewer than that. If you could clarify
Perfect.
criterion.
Yeah, I was just in the process of responding, so that's perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Casey. Are you going down to that question? Okay. So if we say yes, just curious, does it does it allow for narrative there? I can't remember how we orchestrated it, or is it just yes or no? It's yes or no. Okay. So thank you. I think the question says, does the project location, is that?
Double checking to see if anything else pops up under that.
Oh,
Okay, so
Okay, does the project serve? So for this question, we were looking for the project, like the actual project location where it's happening. Is it serving a rural community? And I realize maybe that's a little bit poorly worded. So basically, is this project in or are you a rural community here? So the yes or no is really based on the population of the community where the project is taking place. However, in the narrative portion under the does the project benefit or the project beneficiary question and community context, that narrative question, that is where you can elaborate how this project serves a wider region, which is great, important information. in terms of the context of the project, but that particular question, and again, I think we'll revise how it's worded for the next round. But that particular question, we are looking for where the project is located and if that is a rural community versus is it serving a wider region, which can be elaborated in the project beneficiaries and community context narrative question.
Right. So I'm gonna call on Fred here, but then I'm gonna reserve the rest of our questions until kind of we get through the end of the little navigational piece. We're pretty close there. I just want to make sure we touch on all those points. Go ahead, Fred. If
Sorry, I
go.
was having trouble unmuting. So I just want to make sure I understand, based on what you just said, the first question, you really mean municipality. What municipality is it? Because community can mean a lot of different things. So you want to know, is the municipality that it's located in less than 5,000 people? And then you can
Correct.
talk about the broader community in the next question.
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Great clarification. Thank you, Fred. Well, cool. So I'm going to do a quick little run through, but keep those questions in mind as we circle back around. So, all right, we've done our contacts. We've worked our way through locations and circle back to the budget here. So we filled out our budget table, put in all that great information. There are two validations on that budget table. So if for some reason you didn't put in enough matching share, or the total of NBRC plus the other federal money is over 80%, those things are automatic validations. So they will give you an error if you stumble into that. You can just go in and make edits to your table if you need to. So budget narrative, pretty straightforward for each of those costs over 5,000. Add some info about that. Waiver information. So this one's really important. I want to just highlight here. So the big thing is you need to make sure that you understand whether you will need to be requesting any of these waivers. They do need to be submitted as part of this pre-application process in the system. The program user manuals have more guidance about whether you would qualify for those waivers. So just a note to really pay attention to those. If any of these are marked yes, you will need to submit a document in our files section that we're going to look at in a moment. So if any of those are yes, there's going to be I think that there's going to be a flag that pops up. Yep. You've indicated you need to request one or more waivers. So just keep note of that. We'll swing back around to how to do that in just a moment. So these funding sources and commitments, that's that sources of funding where you can lay out kind of what does that funding stack either look like, or what do you anticipate it looks like, giving us as much information as you have around when you're expecting those things to be secured. So fill that out. You can see that there's, I don't think any of these are required. So just fill it out to the best of your knowledge as you have it there. Save it. And then finally to this Forms and Files tab. So this is where you're going to go to upload those waivers. They're going to be listed under the supporting documents checklist. You can ignore these other three sections here. You're going to have it looks a little bit different in yours, but those three options of waivers are going to show up under here. So I think on my last screen, I said that I needed to apply for an LDD waiver. So there's going to be a line item for that LDD waiver. There's going to be a link to the template. So you're going to click that. It's going to go into your downloaded folder on your computer. You'll open it up, fill that document out, save it, and then you're going to click on this upload button to attach that completed form to the record. So for each of those waivers that are applicable, make sure you download that template, fill it out, upload it back, and save. And then great, I have filled out all of the things. And so you'll when you are ready, you can hit that submit to grantor button, and that will send your pre-application over to us. So that's kind of high level for that process. I'm gonna just, if anyone has questions, opening the floor back up. I see some folks with raised hands. So Amy, if you want to come off mute.
Thank you. I have 3 different questions. I just wanted to confirm that there's no way to attach anything else other than to forms and files. So if we have supporting documentation, this isn't the time for it. Is that correct?
That's right. The only documents that you're going to attach are any applicable waivers. Everything else is collected in those fields, and we are going to collect additional information during the full application phase, so that you will have a few more documents to upload there.
Okay, my second question, so I did go in and add our LDD because we have to have an LDD, but that doesn't force us to then have an LDD waiver. As I understand it, when I read the rules, you only have an LDD waiver if you need them to further your application if you're invited. Is that correct?
I'm gonna have Adrian jump in and answer that.
Sure. Okay, so all Catalyst program grantees are required to use the grant administration services of the local development district unless they are a state agency. If a applicant feels that they have the grant administration capacity and experience to manage federal grants, some of the grantees are larger organizations or communities that have sort of a strong financial management program in-house already. You can apply for the LDD waiver. This would essentially eliminate that requirement that 2% of the MBRC requested funds go to the LDD for grant administration. So this LDD is required at the pre-application phase. It can't be applied for later on if you're invited to the application phase. So if you are interested in an LDD waiver, it's recommended that you submit it now with the pre-application. Otherwise, you will be asked, if you're not in a state agency, you will be asked to contract with your local development district.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And then my last question goes back to the budgets. And I think CJ earlier may have answered it, but I just wanted to get clarification on these line items. Is it okay in this early phase to roll up some of these expenses and just, for instance, use the construction and consultant line items if we don't have the breakout for indirect and other direct and maybe fringe?
Right. If you do not have, an estimated cost available, you can fill in, so our purpose of the budget, I should say, is that we have a good idea of how you're planning to use the MBRC requested funds and how the match fits in. So if you're not sure, if you can't put together an indirect estimate, you don't have to fill out each column, but if you have a rough idea, if you think it's going to be $20,000 in indirect costs, it'd be better to put in what you think it might be now, just to give us an idea of how your budget will be allocated. You can make changes between the pre-application phase and the application phase to your budget. But again, if it's helpful to to include those estimates now. If you really don't know and you want to put it towards construction for now or something along those lines, you can. There's no like hard and fast rule, but again, the idea is that you give us the best picture you can of how funds will be allocated. And we recognize that that may change a little bit between the pre-application and the application phase.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, see, your hand is up. All right. Well, Cynthia, if you have a question, feel free to pop in. Otherwise, if we have any other questions.
Casey, I think there was a question about if you say no to all 3 waivers, will the supporting document list still be there? And I believe that is yes, but you just would not be uploading documents. Is that correct?
Yeah, those documents are, it's not going to, you will get the little pop-up message if at the top, if any of those fields are marked yes, but the system is not going to prompt you to upload any of those files. So that's kind of why I'm just highlighting again, just to be mindful that, you know, if you're saying yes to any of those, you do have to make sure you go in and do that. Otherwise, we won't have that. Sarah.
Yes, Francie has a question, but she wasn't able to raise her hand. So Francie, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. So if you go back to the, I guess it's the first page where, yeah, the overview page, and where it says opportunity overview, and scroll to the right where it says budget type construction. So our project is non-construction, and for the life of me, I haven't been able to figure out how to change that. Do I need to? It sounds like Sarah says no.
Thankfully, so that the information in this opportunity overview is just pulling straight from the funding announcement. And so those aren't settings that you need to necessarily like change or worry about.
Okay. And then I think with regard to the budget, you mentioned that everything is in the fields provided on the budget tab. So I don't need to upload that detailed budget form that was given as an example.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So, you know, filling out those line items as, you know, as best you can, using the budget narrative if you want to provide additional information or context.
Okay. And I guess you've covered the LDD match or, you know, the kind of the match funds and the LDD sufficiently, it sounds like. So if it's $100,000, then the NBRC share would be 48,000 and other would be 52.
I'm sorry, my brain just short-circuited on the math piece of it.
So the 2% would reside with other federal. I mean, other match, sorry.
Sure. The LDD costs are an eligible NBRC expense. You can list them on the NBRC share. And it's 2%, a straight 2% of the requested amount from NBRC. So if you are requesting $100,000, then it's $2,000 towards LDD costs.
Right. And so do we split that or does
You don't need to. It's an eligible NBRC reimbursable cost. You can put that all in the NBRC share. You can, of course, put it as something that you would pay for with your match. Typically people put it in as a part of the NBRC share.
Okay. So when it flows to the bottom, if I have 52,000 for the NBRC share and 48 for the applicant match, is that an error?
The math is a little bit, it doesn't end up being exactly, if your match were 50%, it's not going to end up being exactly like this has to be, if it were 100,000, for instance, 5248 wouldn't trigger that. There's the way that we calculate it is a little bit different, and so that threshold is going to be a little bit lower. You will get a message if the total of your applicant match is below the minimum that we would require.
Okay, I mean, I'm just trying to kind of sort it out. Is it, in the case of 100,000, is it 50-50? Is it 51-49? You know,
It
Yeah.
depends on your county. So are you,
in the case of a 50-50
okay,
situation.
The minimum match amount, and Sarah, Adrian can correct me, the minimum required match amount that's for the validation purposes is going to be half of whatever you're asking for in the case of a 50%. It's not half of the total project.
Yes, so if your project costs $100,000, the MBRC share, are you requesting $100,000 or is the project cost $100,000?
I'm just arguing the case that, for easy math, that the project cost is $100,000 all in.
Yeah,
So,
it's
so then,
yeah,
So-
sorry. So then you would be requesting 50,000 in that case from MBRC, and 50,000 would be the applicant or other federal share match.
Okay.
so you would actually, you wouldn't get a validation error unless, so say the total project cost is 100,000. It really works out to about a third. So like if you did like total crop, you asking for 66,000, you would only be required to put in 33,000 under match for a total project cost of 99. So basically just take whatever that matching rate is in the locations tab, apply that to whatever the total is under NBRC share. And that's going to be whatever number that is what's going to, anything lower than that, you're going to get an error.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, match can be tricky, so let us know if you have any other questions. You can definitely email questions or call us with questions like that too.
CJ.
Well, I may have misunderstood the match. It may not, it doesn't exactly matter in our case because we have to pay more than 50% of the program cost because of how much it costs. But are you saying that we pay the same as NBRC, or are you saying we pay 50% of what NBRC pays? In other words, you just said thirds. So let's just say the program was 300,000, I'm just making it up. Are you saying we could ask NBRC for 200,000 and we would only be required to pay half that amount or an equal amount?
The way that the validation is set up is that you would only be required to list matching funds for half of what you're asking for. So if you're asked for 200,000 and your minimum required, then your minimum required would be 100,000.
Okay, so it's not 50-50 NBRC applicant, it's 50% of what you ask NBRC for. Thank you.
Right.
I didn't understand it that way. Thank you.
No, it's okay. I have been confused about it myself, and so you're definitely not alone. And if you have any other questions as you're running into it, I would definitely encourage you to shoot us an email. We can get that squared away.
Yeah.
Awesome.
John Gorham had a question in the chat that I'm not sure I understand well enough to answer.
Let me take a look.
has to do with fringe benefits
red
and
there.
personnel.
Yeah, but the output shows them.
So typically, fringe benefits. Typically the costs of a consultant are all wrapped up into that line item. And fringe and benefits are not typically applied to a consultant cost. Does that answer did I interpret your question correctly?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, sure.
But I guess the question is, to go further, if there's local forces, is that where you would start to apply their labor cost to something?
Yes, so the personnel category is for folks that are within the organization that are directly supporting the project. So if a town has a town planner that's supporting a project, or a Department of Public Works employee that's supporting the project directly, you can put their hours as well as their fringe costs associated with that member in that category.
Perfect. Thank you.
Adrian, there's also a question from Cynthia Stewart. Could you cover sort of the partial notice to proceed and when you can and cannot expend your matching funds?
Yes. So for MBRC, we require what we call the notice to proceed before a grantee is allowed to spend or commit any award funds from MBRC or the match and cost share associated with the project. So again, anything sort of done before you receive that official notice to proceed is not reimbursable and cannot count towards match and cost share of the project. The partial notice to proceed comes into play for some very specific costs or situations that where an applicant might need to use some of the funds towards final engineering, towards National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, environmental review tasks, things of that nature. Sometimes we put out a partial notice to proceed for the transfer of property that might be associated with the award. So there are some very specific instances where we can issue what we call a partial notice to proceed, which allows access to very specific amounts of funding dedicated to very specific tasks. The full notice to proceed obviously allows access to the full amount of funds and cost share in that. And I'll just say that when we say committed, that often refers to things like entering into a contract with a general manager for a project, or entering into a contract for the purchase of specific equipment or supplies. That all needs to happen after the notice to proceed. And all of our procurement, that would fall under procurement. All of our procurement standards are in our grant administration and compliance manual, which is available on our resources page if you're curious about how it works for procuring goods and services.
Some big questions. I'm just clocking that we are at time. It's been awesome to have such an engaged group, and we're excited to see what you send along to us. Unless we have any super burning issues we need to jump on at the moment, I'll suggest you shoot us an email at admin@nbrc.gov. We've got a team working to take this as quickly as we can. So thank you all, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.